Thank you. I didn't realize I was going to have this microphone. It's like I'm hosting a game show or something. It's kind of not used to this. Well, it's really an honor to be here, and it's for my first time to McGill, and it's quite an impressive school, and what a wonderful festival that AUN has put together. So really fantastic. Great. My idea was, first of all, I apologize for the low-tech nature of my presentation. Although I did buy a new shirt for this. Okay, so hopefully that makes up for the lack of slides. I gave you a little thing, there's a handout with a biography of Alejandro and some program notes about the piece. First I want to say, Alejandro, I'm sure many of you know the name Alejandro Vinao, probably some of you played his music. I first learned of him, I knew of his piece Tumblers, although I'd never played Tumblers. I knew of that piece first, which I think is a piece written in the late 80s by Alejandro. And then subsequently he wrote a concerto after that. And then there was some time before he wrote anything for us. I think the next work, which is the work that I got to know his music through, which is Con Variations, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. That piece has become almost like pop music in the percussion world. So I really enjoyed working on that piece and learning it. Actually, I have to say that at first, when I approached it, actually I remember getting a MIDI file from Alejandro, and if you ever received any of or heard Alejandro's MIDI files, it makes you not really want to play the piece because the MIDI sounds so good. It's like, what's the point? It'll never be this good. But I wasn't sure I was in love with the piece, and as I delved into it, it was a great learning experience for me later in life. That wow, there's a lot of music in here, and despite the complexity and the uphill battle to digest all the notes, I really learned to love that piece and subsequently performed it a lot and recorded it. As a result of that, I commissioned Alejandro to write a piece for me and a really great friend of mine who teaches at Northwestern, the pianist Alan Chow, a piece called Riff, which is a really wonderful, big mammoth work for piano and marimba, and truly a piece that's a duo piece, not a piece that, we were looking for a piece that was really a piece that works together, not something with accompaniment. And as I'm sure you know, there's not a lot of great music, in my opinion, for marimba and piano, really. And Riff, I think, is a beautiful piece, and we performed that, and I played that piece of his and commissioned him. And then it goes on, and I commissioned, I was involved in the Book of Grooves commission series, which is a great duos by Alejandro. If you don't know those pieces, they're a lot of fun to play, very accessible pieces, but also he has in his way, has a great way of making the instrument sound beautiful and understands the voicing of the instrument. And those pieces are great. And then following that, I got involved. He said, let's write another solo piece, and I thought, okay, do I want more pain in my life? And my wife thought, what are you, nuts? And sure enough, I did it anyways, I think. And so he wrote this piece for me. And I'll come back to this piece, which is called Burritt Variations, and we'll talk about that. And then after that, I commissioned a piece that we premiered at PASIC about 2 years ago with the Eastman Group called Water, which is a sextet, actually 5 percussion and piano, which is a really great work, I think. His idea was to write sextet as a piece that goes along with some of the other great sextets that we have for the chamber percussion world, Persifasa and Pleiades and Liva de Claviers, the James Wood new sextet, and then this piece by Alejandro. So it's a great piece, and I've been really thrilled, I guess, in starting here, just to say that he's a dear friend of mine and someone that I think if you're involved with composers, sometimes you get particularly connected with a certain one or a certain couple, and playing their music means a lot to you beyond just liking the music. It's a person that you enjoy working with, which is what music's all about. So this piece, Burritt Variations, written in 2012, he sent me the first, I remember he sent me the first file of the piece, and I wasn't sure I liked it, actually. At first I was like, I don't know, do I want to do this, And then as I listened to it more, I thought, I kind of do, I think I'm kind of into this. It was interesting because he said, do you want something like this? And he sent it to me, and I listened, and I thought, okay, yeah, maybe. And then as I listened to it more, I thought, yeah, go ahead, go do it. So he did it. And I'm sure many of you have been involved with new pieces. This piece came in sections, and we worked through it, and I learned it as it came. And I remember one of my more scary moments was when I wrote him an email, said, I feel like it's too long. And I remember before I wrote that email, I felt it was like one of those moments when you're afraid to like push send, when you say, Alejandro, I think it's too long. I was ready to write back, what are you, nuts? What do you know? So he wrote back and he said, I think you're right. I thought, good. So I thought he might take some time off. He took about 4 measures out of the piece, so, which is fine. So I was hoping for a reprise, but we have a great relationship, and I've enjoyed working with him, and he's the kind of composer that really wants to make it work on the instrument. It is difficult music, but he does work to make it work. So what I wanted to talk a little bit about before I play some of it for you is just about what he looks for in his music and what he looks for in this piece, and then related to some other pieces he's written. And if there's time, I'll try and run it through for you. This is a quote from Alejandro. He says, the most important and perhaps most difficult issue in this piece is to bring out the polyphony independently in both hands while keeping the rhythms grooving, which is especially difficult. When they groove differently in each hand, that is what the piece is all about. There is always the issue of maintaining steady overall tempo, letting the rhythms do their job, rather than trying to accelerate or decelerate in this or that bar. Which may work in other pieces, but in this piece is not what I'm looking for. Although I'll warn you, I may be rushing here and there. So, okay. And then he says his inspiration for the piece. He talks about that. I asked him what his inspiration. He says, it's really kind of a Latin theme, and a lot of my music comes from my culture and the Latin nature, the sounds that were around me. I remember Steve Schick actually saying one year took that long walk to see if the sounds around him influenced the music in his life and vice versa. Am I quoting you correctly, Steve? I think, And I think that's true. The sounds around you, certainly all composers would say they influence the music that they write. So with this piece, I hear it in there, and let me demonstrate the beginning of this for you. Theme, which is... It goes on. So I went a little bit beyond the theme, sorry. But the theme being... So there you have it. And then he varies it quite immediately. So from my standpoint, when I hear a lot of different people play these pieces, my students and other people that come have lessons in me, and of course, everyone brings their own interpretation to everything they do. And sometimes you hear a piece, I think most of us hear music, and the music that we hear, that we play, can bring about a different kind of impression to us. It hits us in our own way because of the experiences we've had. So for me, I believe, and it's not very sophisticated, but I'm kind of a drummer at heart, and matter of fact, I thought I was going to be a drummer, and I don't know how I ended up here doing this, but it somehow happened. And so when I play his music, and I think that's one of the things that resonates most with me about Alejandro's music, is the fact that it has that really strong rhythmic nature to it. And my sensibility is to bring a sense of drumming to it in a way, but also that sense of inflection that gives it that, what he would call that Latin swagger. What does that mean? And I find, actually, as a pedagogue, these kind of things are the hardest things to teach. How do you teach feel? How do you teach inflection in a way that's not just academic, but actually is in here? And of course, that comes a lot from listening to different pieces and having your ears filled with certain kinds of music to help you really understand it. For me, on a basic level, if you hear this theme, so there it is. So I can put accents, because it just basically traces the tritone between F and B, all right? Which, by the way, is why I came up with this sticking. I like the idea of framing it and my sticking being initially cyclic. All right? Then what do you do with that to create that swagger, to create that feel that then you're going to continue in your interpretation of the piece? And if you look at the beginning, and I'm sorry I should have slides to show you this stuff, so forgive me, you can look at my music afterwards, but you're going to have to trust me. He has some tenuto marks, but that's all he's written. And if you know, when you look at Bach, I always use this as a great example. Bach gives us music, and the Ur text of Bach has very little in dynamics or slurs or anything else. Some has a little more, but most of it is pretty much, he assumes that we know the language and we're going to do the right thing, right? Same thing's true with text. Most text, if you're reading, or if you're reading in a play or a drama, or even reading it something out loud in class, you give it inflection, you give it conversation. You know when someone says, hey, Mike, can you go to the store and buy some milk? Don't forget to pick up the cheese as well, or something. You inflect it in a way. I'm kind of hungry, sorry, I'm getting milk and cheese on the brain. You inflect it in a way that throws away at the antecedent of the sentence and the consequent. And I think the same thing's true here. So for me, I hear this, and I hear that swagger by doing two things. One, inflecting the bigger notes, ghosting the notes that aren't as important as part of the theme, and trying to, the best I can, almost play it in a wider fashion. Okay, have you ever heard the drummer Steve Gadd play? He plays in a very wide, I call a wide beat. So I'm going to try that for you here, see if you can hear that. So you hear. And then you hear the first part of two voicing come in there. So hopefully you can hear a sense of style, and when you hear the beginning of the piece, you're getting not only a sense of this half-step, whole-step sound that he uses so often, kind of an octatonic scale that he tends to play around with often, but you're getting a sense of the style and nature and orientation of what this piece is about in terms of character. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay, good. I'm trying. Even without slides, you're getting this? Good, okay. All right, so let's move on. I know I don't have that much time, and I tend to be long-winded, as I've been told by my kids and my wife. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to just mention very quickly is sound, and how the importance of sound. I think, when you know a composer, and it's a living composer, and you can talk to them about the sound, certainly if you're doing a piece that requires a setup, and you can really meet with the composer and get the exact sounds they want, that's great. I remember reading an article once that Michael Udau interviewed Stockhausen about Ziklus, and Stockhausen said, "You can only play my piece if you use my instruments." I thought, wow, I'll never play the piece, I guess. So, but, composers have ideas about the sounds they want. And this isn't that complicated when it comes to marimba, but the challenge with the marimba is I'm playing a lot of registers, and Vinao tends to write a lot of registers at once. He likes a sound, I think, that is a little more ethnic in nature, a lot of fundamental. So I try to use a mallet when I'm making these decisions. I'm deciding, okay, this piece sits by and large in the middle register. It does have some big sounds down here. It's not as much up here, but it does sort of carry the upper octave every once in a while. So I'm making my concessions this is where I'm going to choose a mallet that sounds the best. And I know he always uses the word brittle. Nothing brittle, please. So he doesn't like that mallet. This is sort of a mallet that has a rubber core. I don't want to get a sound that, this is a great mallet, but it has a different sound. There's a little bit of an overtone in that's high because there's a plastic core. I don't know if you can hear that in this room. I don't have a lot of that kind of mallet here to show you, but he doesn't like that sound. So I'm trying to get sort of that ethnic sound in the piece and use that kind of mallet. All right, another aspect of this that I think is interesting that I wanted to share with you is one of my favorite variations in here is the kind of the middle variation, variation 4. And what he does, and this is something that another big influence of Vinao's, and you see this in a lot of his maybe the music over the last 10 to 15 years, and that is his influence from Conlon Nancaro, all right, the famous Mexican composer that wrote many pieces in multi-temporality, right? And Nancaro's pieces, almost impossible to play by human, all the player piano pieces that were done. So Alejandro has been using this idea of incorporating Nancaro's systemized multi-tempos into his pieces. And in the middle variation here, and actually you see that, the con variations, right? There's a thing. for con variations. And the second variation in con variations, let's see if I can hopefully remember this. I realized yesterday that I hadn't practiced this enough, so let's see if I can remember how this goes here. But in the second variation, he brings in this first example of this. I want to show you this here, then how it relates to this piece. He has the theme in the same register, and then there's a pedal point that comes in on a low C sharp that oscillates every 5/8 notes. And you hear this, all of a sudden, this oscillating sense of, polyphony in the meter, which is, I think, quite brilliant and very interesting. Yet it's written all in one time signature. So it's very much like, it reminds me of how Elliott Carter's timpani pieces work. When I was working on this, I remember thinking that some of those pieces, but they're all, of course, based in allometric modulations, and some of them you can hear those multi-tempos going on, or the sense of different tempos, but yet you see it in the same meter. It's interesting. So here's the second variation of con. And so on. So you see that C sharp, this is happening every 5/8 notes. The meter of the right hand is the same meter the theme was originally in. So you get that multi-tempo. You get the same thing in the fourth variation of Burritt variations, but in a different way. Kind of actually, in some ways, there's 3 layers of tempo going on here. We have a pulse in the inside on an 8th note that stays there the whole time in the variation. Then we have an oscillating 32nd note that's up in the upper voice. It starts on a B natural, later moves to D. And this B natural starts a 32nd note off the 8th note and then comes to the 8th note and then moves away from it and then travels back to it. So it's like on its own journey. It reminds me, again, this is maybe a stretch, so forgive me, but it reminds me of the multi-tempos in Persifasa, where you have 6 guys doing different tempos, and then they all end up eventually at the same place. It's like starting at the hotel or starting somewhere else, and we're all going to walk at different speeds, and hopefully our job is at different speeds to arrive here at 5 o'clock. So some of us are going to drive faster than others, right? This is the same kind of concept, and I think it's a beautiful concept. And here the left hand has variations on 4/3 feels, and you hear the theme of the piece. I'll give you a little taste of this and see if you can see this relationship. And so on. So you can hear that. I think it's a beautiful section, and I think it's a very effective section. In some ways, I think it's the section that, after I play the piece, almost everyone says, "Wow, I really love that one section." You can do all this crazy stuff, and they just love the openness of that. And it's great. Of course, he does a beautiful job of making the marimba sound great, by the way he marimba straights. I think another thing that I didn't really think I would mention or consider mentioning, but I think it's important and kind of unique, and I think actually great, is that he doesn't use any rolls. He doesn't do any tremolos on the marimba and in these pieces. And I think he sort of understands how the marimba works in its own resonance, what gives it its own unique sort of sound and flavor, and he writes the music in a way that complements that. I think that's also brilliant, and one of the reasons also that I like it. I love to roll. It's fun. It's great. But it doesn't always really sound great. Can sometimes sound like an effect as opposed to a part of the music. I think it's a tricky thing, so he does a great job with that. Let's see. Have another hour and a half here to go. No, I'm kidding. I knew this. I knew you guys would laugh. I think that is enough on this. Am I missing anything I wanted to say in here? I don't think so. So. Yeah, I guess maybe I could play the piece. I could try. I never make any promises. I remember Steve Schick saying, once at a concert. He says he's about to play Brian Ferneyhough, and he said, "Let's see how it takes the turns today." It's great. Yeah. So, anyway, we're going to try Burritt variations for you. Again, thanks for having me here. And at the end, if there's some time, I'd be happy to answer questions if you have any. I don't know if I have any answers, but I'll try. Okay. So, thanks again, Ayun and everyone, and thanks, Nick, for doing such a great job and being a great student. And I'm going to try and get this off without hurting myself. It was okay, you know. So, one thing I wanted to mention that I tell my students this often. It's something that I think a lot about because of my generation. I mean, I'm 53 and was in school in the very early '80s. Went to Eastman in the early '80s, and during my time, there was sort of an evolution of marimba repertoire that was happening. Of course, Lee Stevens and Gordon Stout had been there prior to me about 10 years, and some music, because of their resurgence in that area, had sparked some new pieces. But I think one thing I thought it struck me about a year ago. I don't know why it took me this long to think about this, but you know, we as percussionists, we learn the music we learn in high school and even in the early days of university. We learn a lot of kind of student-type pieces. Some of them are very important pieces, Mitchell Peters pieces, even the Musser etudes and other pieces. Certainly some of my music would be in that category. And they're a certain size of piece, you know. The earlier pieces are very short pieces. And I feel like what happens, and one of the difficulties in our curriculum is that we go from here's this piece to like, whew, now learn this. Both in terms of its, length, but also in terms of its sophistication and difficulty. I remember when I was a grad student at Eastman, I was the first person to play the Variations on Lost Love by David Maslanka, which now seems like an old school piece written for low A marimba. For me, it was like a huge thing. It was like, the piece was like, I think 15 minutes long. I thought, I can't play anything for 15 minutes, you know? And I remember learning that piece, and I was like, wow. And since then, not so much even just length, but level of difficulty and the demands of that kind of concentration that it takes to play pieces like this, or pieces like Conversations, or pieces like Velocities, or you name it, aren't things we learn. You know, I think pianists learn that stuff younger, because they have great repertoire that they learn at a young age, and we have to come into this later. And then all of a sudden, we're expected to jump into this, and we can do this, right? Because rhythmically, it's fine. But there's a lot of other things going on that we don't have that same training for. And that's something, even in my generation, I find like it really is profound for me to think about. Why is it always hard? Why are these things hard things for us in terms of concentration and length? And why does it seem like for us these are big deals? And I think part of it's because we're not brought up with it. So, and hopefully that'll change.